Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar on crisis communications during the Disability Royal Commission. My name is Henry Newton. I'm a Senior Policy Officer at National Disability Services, and my role is primarily focusing on the Royal Commission. So if I haven't had something to do with you by now, then hopefully I'll have something to do with you in the not too distant future. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all meeting today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and also extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today in this webinar. Before we start and before I introduce Joe, I just wanted to kind of touch on a couple of things by way of an overview of where we're at with the Royal Commission. So we've had two hearings between when the Royal Commission was set up and the end of last year, one focusing on accommodation and the other focusing on education. At the very end of last year, the Royal Commission released its first progress report. There was kind of scant new information in that progress report, but it was quite a good summary of the activities the Royal Commission has conducted to date. And, you know, if you kind of read between the lines, you can kind of get an idea of where their priorities may lie into the future. At the same time, we also had the schedule for the first half of this year released as well. And so we can get an idea that they're certainly not slowing down. In fact, it seems like they're ramping up. There are hearings that are to be held every month from February through to June, which is the time period the schedule covers, and a number of community engagement events, as well as engagement events with First Nations people as well. Another thing, given the content of this webinar, I thought it'd be worth noting that NDS recently released our third information sheet, which was about communicating well during a Royal Commission, with some ideas for things that providers may want to consider when communicating in the context of a Royal Commission with staff, with clients and their families, and also kind of broadly in terms of their external communications as well. So anyhow, I will now introduce Joe. So Joe Scard is the founder and CEO at 50 Acres. And with over 20 years experience in communications, corporate and political advisory roles and journalism, Joe is one of Australia's foremost strategic advisors. Joe played a unique role as a senior advisor to the Rudd and Gillard governments, managing complex Senate negotiations across all portfolios. As a consultant at world-leading public affairs agency Gavin Anderson, Joe advised domestic and offshore governments and major global corporates on complex strategic communications issues. She's also a respected former journalist in the UK and Australia, working with ITV, Associated Press, Seven Network, SBS, ABC and Fairfax. A trained lawyer, she's a member of the New South Wales Council of Public Relations Institute of Australia and on the boards of the Australian Women Chamber of Commerce and Industry and Hockey ACT. So welcome, Joe. Joe, are you there? Okay, I can't hear Joe, which I think means that perhaps
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can now hear Joe, which I presume means the listeners can hear Joe, and I will hand over to you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear, Joe.
Great. Would you like me to kick off?
Please do. I can see some people online are saying they can now hear you as well, so that's good to hear.
Thank you very much. If, Henry, you're having any difficulties hearing me, just let me know. I was hearing a little slight wonk on the audio just now. I don't know whether any of the participants are having that problem, but do let me know and I can change Wi-Fi if necessary. My apologies if we have to do that. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and I'm really pleased to be able to be here to help you, move through the process of the Disability Royal Commission. It's an onerous process at the very least, and confronting and emotional and laden with difficulty along the way at the very worst. And so what I'm hoping to do today is be able to give you some ideas and practical strategies and tips to be able to help you move forward through that process. Also on the inbox, the box there on your screen, you'll see that there is a checklist that is provided that you can download. It'll also be sent to you later, but it's a sort of a condensed version, if you like, of what we're talking about today, a step-through process that you can adopt if any issues arise for yourself or the organisation that you work with in the next months and years. So let's just kick off. Henry very, very gratefully introduced us. Probably many of you know us. 50 Acres has been around for 10 years this year, and we're very excited to have been able to work with close to 500 not-for-profits. Let's move on to what we're talking about today. So what are we going to cover today? This webinar is going to be delivered in 3 parts. First of all, preparing for the Royal Commission. I want to help you understand how best to think about preparing your organisation for the Royal Commission as we approach it. And I know some of these things you're being asked to do various things right now, and so this is going to be very much top of mind. Part 2, during the Commission itself, how you manage staying on top of the agenda and the media and keeping your stakeholders informed. Part 3, what to do if, unfortunately, there is a crisis that you have to deal with. What are some of the practical steps that you can look at adopting and walking through in the event of a media crisis situation? And then 4, when we get to the end, is wrap up questions. Anything that people want to ask, please pop anything that you want to talk about into the question box, and Henry will guide me through any questions that you have towards the end. So let's start. Preparing for the Royal Commission is obviously something that we need to do. The better prepared we are, the better we'll be. So let's think about, first of all, what is a crisis? People talk about a crisis. There is so many times that we've been asked to prepare a crisis strategy or crisis messages for people, and I'm sure yourself and your organisation have crisis plans in place. But what is it? It's really, I suppose, it's a very high impact event where you don't have control necessarily, or it threatens the viability and the sustainability of your organisation. The very first thing that you do is obviously respond to protect the integrity of your organisation. It's vital. Getting in front of the problem rather than being behind it is obviously critical. The types of crises that might arise for you and you as service providers during the Commission, there's a whole multitude, and I always say to people, you can never predict the full array of crises that might come. That's the nature of a crisis. It's something that you didn't predict was going to happen. Unauthorised procedures that might have happened, inadequate supervision or quality control, misuse of confidential information, errors of judgment, or perhaps inadequate standard operating procedures. There could be a multitude of things that even aren't on that list that might come up. So how do you prepare your organisation for the Royal Commission? Well, what you need to do is do it immediately. There's no time like the present. The disability sector, like the aged care sector, has a lot of challenges, like any part of the not-for-profit space that are involved with service delivery. It's the nature of the work, and it's the nature of the sector that is still evolving and adapting to the introduction of the NDIS. You all know that. You obviously might not know what issues are going to surface. We can never predict those, unfortunately. unfortunately, but the issues can be mapped and preparations can be made. Structures put in place, I think more importantly, about what you can do if something hits. Who do you talk to? Where do you what preparations do you put in place immediately? What information structures and flow do you undertake immediately to try and, again, get out in front of the problem and the issue? It's important that your organisation prepares well in advance of any issue or crisis happening. So start this week if you can. If you haven't already started thinking about it, start this week. Crisis communication strategies don't not touched or not referred to. They can be short documents, practical spreadsheets that are useful things that people can turn to in the event of a problem. Please don't think that a crisis strategy needs to be done by, a specialist or an extraordinary person. Doing something rather than nothing is preferable at this point. Getting prepared is the key. How should we prepare? Well, there's some things that you should be preparing now in advance of the Royal Commission. There's a couple of things that I think you can think about if you haven't already. A risk assessment. Sit down together with your team or the key people who are involved with these things and think about, a risk assessment for their particular sections, or if you're in charge or the board, whoever it is that you can task to get involved with this, identify any governance, risk and conduct issues that may arise from the Royal Commission's terms of reference and the conduct of your organisation. What's happened to you historically? Are you aware of any issues that may come up if you were to be called before the Commission, for example? Are there any things that have come up in the media before that have come to public light? Are there any legal issues that you've had? Put all of that into risk assessment. A spreadsheet will suffice. Something more complex if you can do it. Undertake that initial risk assessment. Then prepare an issues management plan. Again, it can be a really simple document, a spreadsheet. Your plan should consider all of your key stakeholders in the context of the Royal Commission and map the issues that might arise and how you would deal with them in a practical way. This isn't time for theories about crisis management and how to respond, in a complex way. It's about action. It's about responsibility. It's about what you do. That's what you need to be thinking. So how do you develop that issues management plan? Well, issues management planning will prepare, you and your organisation. Remember, the organisation is made up of people to respond to any issues that arise that can be managed so that they don't escalate into a full-blown crisis. That's what we're trying to prevent, getting out in front. I'll keep saying that, but getting out in front is what the key is here with crisis management. Crisis can escalate, and if it does, it can impact your organisation and its reputation, and we want to avoid that at all costs. Obviously, keep in mind that emails, both internal and external emails regarding the Royal Commission, may be read by the Commission and made public. So, consider those things legally. If necessary, get legal advice. I'm not a lawyer, I'm legally trained, but, and I'm sure the NDS would be giving you that same advice. Your issues management plan should, first of all, map, lay out likely issues that could arise during the Royal Commission. Secondly, map key messages and response for each issue. And then include a process, a mechanism, how you will deal with scanning this, staying on top of the media. How will you stay in contact with stakeholders and others? What are the practical steps you would do and you would take during this problem? How will you act? Will you send emails? Will you call people? Will you mail them in the post? What is it that you will do? Then establish the procedure for response. Enact that. If the board needs to approve it, go through those processes so that these plans are in place and authorised if needs be, well ahead of time. So let's move on to during the Royal Commission itself. What happens when the Royal Commission is on? It's in full throttle. There are hearings on. There are people that are being questioned by the Commission, and there are stories that are in the media. We don't know what they will be yet. We're not sure what is yet to come, but we can think about what we will do. So we've got our plan in place. We've done our risk assessment. We've got our structures and our procedures in place, and they're approved. So we're ready. We're as ready as we can be for the Royal Commission itself. Let's think about what we do now. First of all, let's stay on top of the issues. One of the most important things that you can do during the Royal Commission itself is to stay ahead, stay on top of everything that's happening. It's a really big ask, isn't it? We can remember the years of hearings of many of the Royal Commissions that have gone before, and to say that is not a small thing. It requires resources, and it requires a willingness to do so, and it requires information. That requires you to get systems in place to make sure you have that information. Now, the ideal way of doing that is to get media monitoring. And if the way you can do that is to engage a company like Meltwater or Essentia, or one of those companies, to provide you with coverage and keywords. Obviously, that comes with a cost. If you can't afford that, then another option is to do those scans yourself using Google or just literally looking through the media itself. So, I'm sure the NDS also will provide you with intelligence and supply you with information, but there is nothing quite as good as securing that information and doing those scans yourself, because from your point of view, you've got the purview, if you like, you've got the lens of seeing the problems from your own perspective. No one else can do that than you. So while the Royal Commission is being held, media reports and public perception, can impact staff and your clients and the stakeholders of your organisation. You need to really be across all of that information to stay ahead of what's happening, so that you can identify any issues, you can manage them, you can allay people's concerns, you can put those responses into place, you can take action, more importantly. We can say all these words like mechanisms and procedures, but there is nothing like a plan that it doesn't do anything. You have to have something that equates to practical action that someone can pick up and do. Someone in your organisation can say, let's do this now. Let's send out this email. Let's send out this marketing response. Let's send out this media release. Really practical, simple steps that aren't overly complicated. So what do we do in terms of issues scanning? This is what we were referring to before. Some of you have media monitoring in place, some of you don't. Some of the things that you can do to keep on top of the issues and media reports are these. Continue to watch the media. Set up media monitoring if you can. Obviously, that's a really preferred model if you can, to receive real-time updates. Approximately a once-off yearly subscription to something like Essentia or Meltwater is about $6,000. It may be the best $6,000 that you spent, because you will get a thorough download in real time of everything that's said: radio, print, TV. It may be the best $6,000 investment that you make. So don't say, oh, it's too much for us. Think about the impact that it could have, the positive impact that that expenditure can have before you dismiss it as an outlay. That's obviously a question for you and your organisation. Set up Google Alerts to receive alerts on media reports and other content that's being published. And as we know, Google Alerts aren't perfect and they're not in real time. So that is a sort of the downside, if you like, of relying on Google Alerts rather than media monitoring. Stay in contact with key stakeholders who may have other intelligence and knowledge that affect you. You may, obviously you've all got your own different networks and you're getting intelligence in all sorts of different ways. Be open to that, and as I'm sure you are, don't get alarmed and don't respond in an inappropriate way. Every rumour is not going to result in a crisis, as we all know. In politics and public life, there are far more rumours than there are reality. It is going to be the same with this Royal Commission. There will be rumours, there will be innuendo, there will be all sorts of suggestions. There'll be suggestions that there'll be X or Y coverage, that there'll be a story from 7:30 or a story from Four Corners, or it'll be on this or that, or it'll be on a current affair. Some of that may be true, some of that may not be true. And so you need to not respond to shadows, jump at shadows. Respond when you know that it is real. Being prepared, accepting it as a possibility is always a good thing. But don't, unnecessarily panic yourself or staff at every single suggestion that comes up, because you'll do nothing else other than manage this for the next year or two. And we don't need that. We do not need this to paralyse and stop and completely freeze your organisation. We do not need that. We do not need your organisation not to be able to function. It needs to function through this process. And so it's important for you to be able to keep going, keep soldiering on. So positioning your organisation in terms of during the Royal Commission itself, another way to protect the reputation of your organisation is to ensure there is goodwill and positive messages sort of seeded through, woven into all of your channels. Here are some of the ways that you can think about doing that. Position your organisation, well-managed services and positive community outcomes across your own communication channels, such as social media, newsletters and blogs. Think about having a bank of stories now. Think about having a bank of work done now. Stories in the bank right now are going to be really well placed. You can, depend on them during the Royal Commission itself. Hopefully nothing will happen. Hopefully you'll be able to do some positive stories, and there'll be media that will be looking for positive stories in this space as well as the negative. Not all media are baddies. I think there's probably a misnomer, if you like, that all media are baddies. Some media are unethical. It's a very small percentage of journalists. Journalists usually are doing their job and they're looking for stories. That's what they do. So having that sort of a bank of work, a bank of stories to rely on is a really good thing. Proactively engage with stakeholders who are influential to build positive relationships. There is nothing like having a positive word of mouth of you and your work. Yes, there may be some hiccups along the way, things happen, people make mistakes, stuff occurs, we move on, we deal with them, we apologise, we rectify the problem, we set up different approaches. But if you've got some influential stakeholders, some third-party supporters who are prepared to come in and support you and act as a supporter in a public way, then that's a great thing. We've worked with many organisations in different circumstances through the Royal Commission into child sexual abuse and the Aged Care Royal Commission, where third-party supporters played a really active and positive role. The last thing you can think about doing is maintaining communications with key stakeholders to communicate any issues or risks before they arise. So it's about making sure that you are, again, let's say it, you're ahead of the problem. You're stopping it before it gets worse. you are ahead of it and you can see it, you can deal with it, you can manage it. And that's what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with being as organised and as calm and as structured and as simple in our actions as we possibly can be. Keep it simple, keep it proactive, and be positive throughout any crisis that you might encounter. The next section is what to do in the event of a crisis. So let's reflect. We've done our planning. We've got a issues management scan in place. We've done our, we've got our protocols in place. We are as well positioned as we can be. When reality hits, we are in the middle of the Royal Commission itself, and we are managing it as best as we can. All the organisations will manage it in a different way. When the situation really crystallises, when it becomes, reality, is when a crisis rears its head and shows itself, and we don't know when that's going to be. So let's think about a couple of the options. As soon as a crisis unfolds or reports emerge in the media, or you might even be alerted to the crisis initially by a phone call from a journalist, just asking some questions. Someone calls and starts digging around, and it sounds fishy, it sounds suspicious, it sounds, your radar is alerted, then that's real. Don't just dismiss that. Making sure that any staff that might pick up the phone or come into contact with journalists in any way, or any other stakeholders, again, the networks here, ensuring that you've got the feedback loop happening. Action should commence immediately if you are hearing that sort of feedback loop. The first few hours are crucial, as in filling that information void, that vacuum, and controlling the situation. If a journalist is coming to you, someone from Four Corners or 7:30 Report or ABC News or Current Affair or whoever it is on the phone, or a producer from the project's on the phone asking some questions, or someone from the Daily Telegraph or whoever it is, or the Adelaide Advertiser or the Courier is on the phone asking some questions, you betcha that they are going to be looking and writing a story. Sorry everyone, I had to cough. I'm near Canberra at the moment. There are some fairly bad bushfires here. My apologies. So, what do we do? The best way to manage a crisis is to be open and honest with all stakeholders, without hiding, if you like, from the truth or hiding your involvement. That's not to say if a journalist comes on the phone to the CEO or to the media person or whoever it is that they're talking to, you don't sit back and go, well, let me explain and let me go through the last 10 years of the problem that we've had here and the issues that we've had, and then just give them chapter and verse. That's not the way to respond. You all know that. That's clear. That's instinctual. We don't do that. So I'm not saying to you that we don't tell the journalist the truth, but we need to control how we are informing people, and in what bite-sized chunks or in what portions of information we release to whom and when. You've often seen a crisis situation unfold where the first thing that happens is a one sentence or perhaps a two sentence response comes out from an organisation. Think, and this is very sort of unrelated in some respects, but think recently when Prince Harry and Meghan Markle announced that they were leaving as full-time royals, Buckingham Palace issued very quickly a one or two sentence response. They hadn't been aware that this was going to happen. They effectively issued what's called a holding statement. That's what you need to do. So, but that means that holding statement is not a lie. It's not deceitful. It's not untrue. And this is when, if it is a serious situation, lawyers play a part. If it's not absolutely organisation critical, then perhaps you don't get lawyers involved. But I would suggest, if there is the possibility that these issues might erupt in the future, that you get lawyers involved and think about who those lawyers would be now, rather than waiting until the moment that you have to find a lawyer. It's always quicker to have one pre-arranged. So ignoring the situation will only escalate the issue. Making sure that staff are aware, if they're talking to a journalist or anyone else, this is something that's bubbling and might come up to the surface. If, and as soon as the issue unfolds, communicate it immediately. If you don't, you could lose the opportunity to control the message. We've seen so often, again, and again, I suppose this is a slightly indirect thing, and I'm not meaning to be party political here, but we saw in the recent bushfire crisis that the Prime Minister was out of the country for a couple of days in another country and wasn't able to be physically present to respond to the escalating crisis. That's been something that's dogged him and continues to dog him as a leader. And so we can all learn a lesson from looking at these other crises. They're not necessarily related to a disability service provider, but they are really good lessons to learn what not to do in terms of managing a crisis. Being present, being involved, being prepared to engage and engage with people who are asking questions is the best thing to do. You'll note that since the escalation of the crisis, the Prime Minister has almost been doing daily press conferences. And so he is obviously, working hard to try and turn that perception around that he was not in control of the message. We learn from observing others and observing other situations. That was a pretty serious crisis, and it was interesting to see how it was managed. So let's think about how we deal with the media. First of all, as I said before, you brief key staff ahead of the event of phone calls from the media. A lot of people, journalists are not stupid. I've been a journalist for many years, and if I was really trying to get inside a story and I thought I had a story, I wouldn't just call a media advisor. I wouldn't call a CEO. I wouldn't call a CFO. I'd probably try and go through the back door and call, the front desk of an operation in another place, which is lower down the food chain, so to speak. Start digging around. If you really think you're onto something, and I'm talking about a sort of serious story here, you dig until you put pieces together. And, it's hard to manage. If you've got an organisation that's got many hundreds of staff, it's actually really hard to manage this situation. So, the best thing that you can do is instruct staff to respond sensibly to any questions, and they may not even realise that they're being asked questions about something that might come up at the Royal Commission. They might just think that they're speaking to someone about a problem. So it is a really hard thing to protect your organisation from. I think the best thing to do is instruct staff to, not, I suppose, to, stick to what they know, stick to what they do. And, you don't want to put, fear into them. You want them to be able to continue to operate in the way that they operate day to day. You don't want to make the organisation, freeze up with fear. But what you do want to do is empower people to say, I can't talk to you, I don't, I'll get someone else to speak to you about that. So you need to, if you've got a large organisation, perhaps think about getting your team leaders to speak to their staff about how to deal with potential calls from people who may come in. I'm not saying that everyone will do that, but there are journalists out there who will try a lot of different things, and it is a possibility that they'll come in through the back door and try and get a story. Of course, the most logical thing to do is that they'll call the head office or the key team or the media person or the CEO. We all need to be ready about what we might say in the event of a call. So you need to, first of all, I think if a call comes in, what are the things we do? There are a couple of key things. First of all, we prepare a statement to issue to all media should the need arise. Only you know how long that could be. If you're not sure about the repercussions of this, how widespread this issue is, what are the legal ramifications of it, you know, who's got this information, then clearly one of the best things to do is to write and present a small, short, bite-sized piece of information, a short holding statement. We've all seen those. And then prepare a longer statement and response when you are better placed to do that.
And Joe, I might just jump in there because we've got a question kind of on that. A person's asked, Mary's asked, after making a holding statement and then in between that time and the time where an organisation would engage a lawyer, how does an organisation deal with that space in between that kind of holding statement and engaging a lawyer?
I recommend if it's a serious statement that has the possibility of impacting on, if it has legal ramifications, if it's something that could land you in a court for, you know, criminal or civil action, that you engage a lawyer before you put out a holding statement would be my recommendation. My recommendation would be that you involve a lawyer from the get-go if it is a very big issue of significance. Now, of course, you know, I'm on the other side of the computer here, and there's a lot of people listening to this. You're all going to have different issues. I can't make a decision for you about what's an issue of significance, but I think we're all sensible enough to know, you know, if it's a complaint about, you know, something that is, you know, extremely serious, that would warrant a great deal of attention and perhaps legal action, versus something that is perhaps talking about something less serious that would not require that. My recommendation would be, you know, if you've got the resources, if you've got the ability to involve a lawyer along the way, don't over-involve a lawyer. I've done battle with many a lawyer in terms of media statements. Sometimes lawyers try to really dumb them down, really, you know, simplify it, take all of the emotion and all of the compassion out of a statement. I'm legally trained, I'm a trained lawyer, but I've never occupied that space professionally. But I do think getting a lawyer involved to give you advice, even a little bit of it at the beginning, is probably helpful, and I hope that helps. You know, and again, a lawyer's advice isn't going to get you out of the trouble. Get you out. It's, you know, it's not a get out of jail card. It's not a get out of the problem. There's a whole lot of other things you need to do, but I don't over litigate it, to use that expression. Don't over complicate it. Don't have a team of lawyers in the office ready for the problem to happen. But just have someone that you know available, you know, who may be, and you've probably all got lawyers involved with your organisations, or most of you do. If you don't, NDS might be able to give you some advice, and I'm sure other organisations that you can ask advice from about who they use. I hope that helps. If your spokesperson is unavailable, if someone calls, you know, obviously, you know, take a message from that journalist, reissue the statement. Make sure that you respond to media calls in a timely manner. It's absolutely critical. Don't just sit there. You know, if the CEO's out for the day and you've got 3 staff in the office and the CEO's not back till 4 p.m, don't sit there and go, oh, these 32 calls came in and, well, we didn't want to bother you because you were busy. Or we thought we'd deal with them in the staff meeting this afternoon. You know, you've got to get people to get their wits about them, if you like, as early as they possibly can, to be ready to take action and to keep people informed. This isn't going to happen every day. It may not happen at all. You may not have a problem. But if you do, you need to get ready and organised. don't speak unprepared or off the record. If someone, you know, particularly, well, all journalists are great at getting people to talk off the record and just have a chat. You know, the best way of doing it is to call and say, oh, hi, how are you going? What did you go away in January? It's hot at the moment. Have a chat about something that's happening in their, you know, their neck of the woods, get them all feeling comfortable, you know, et cetera, and then, you know, lo and behold, a few minutes later, you're talking about something that you shouldn't be. So, you know, it is about equipping people with the knowledge that, so that they can be ready just to say no. I'll get someone to call you, brother. That's all you need to do. You don't need to get people to be fearful. You just need to have them equipped with the ability to say no. The last point here is update the website and social media channels with media release information. That's really important, and to, you know, keep that up to date, if you like, because stakeholders will be looking at your website. They will be looking at your social media channels. If you have the problem of trolling, and I'm sure some of you have had that problem, you may decide you either need to manage those channels really well and mediate them. You need to have someone looking at it all the time, because what might happen is, you know, you wake up in the morning at 6 a.m. and you've got a whole bunch of trolls that have made comments overnight. It's difficult. It's resource heavy if you are in the middle of a problem, but it's something that you need to do. You may choose to turn comments off, but if you turn comments off, then you don't get any positive comments either. And you might choose to leave some questions there so that you can respond to them, as you probably have seen when corporates respond to problems online. They often will confront those problems directly and say, I'm really sorry that you think that, or that's happened to you. You know, we are doing this about that. And that is something that you can do in your social channels as well. Again, you know, controlling is important. Controlling to your own benefit is important. And, you know, only you can make an assessment of how bad this is getting. I'm not going to be there with you, but, you know, only you can make an assessment. You know, and I'm sure some of you have had trolls. We're all on social media. We all see trolling. And I'm sure some of you have had that happen to you already. And in these situations, people just, you know, get on there and say stuff because they can. So let's think about communicating to stakeholders. They're really important, because without your staff internally, and without your external supporters or the networks that you rely upon, that you work with day by day, your partners, your, you know, the organisations, government and other that you rely on, an organisation is nothing. You need to make sure that they're fully informed. So you need to make sure that they're, you know, communicated with, you know, in a really timely manner, really efficiently. So what do you do? First of all, I think one of the things that you can do is distribute an email to all internal stakeholders, staff and contractors. I would advise, if it's a serious problem, to get a lawyer involved in that email, because again, it can be used in a legal process. And remember, the Royal Commission is a you know, both a legal and a parliamentary process. Provide written updates to staff via emails as the issue progresses in the media. Then you need to ensure that you respond to queries from external stakeholders as effectively as the media, because you don't want them to be disgruntled. Because this crisis might last a day, it might last 2, it might last a week, but at the end of that time, you go back to, you know, operations and what you normally do, your day job, and you've got to retain those relationships beyond this problem. So it's really important to keep these people informed and on side as best as you can. Communications to clients and families, you know, you're all service providers, well, most of you are service providers who may have increased feelings of concern in the event of these stories. And, you know, some of them might be very, very negative, you know, need to be reviewed. You may need to get counselling and support in place if it gets serious. And again, only you can make those decisions. It's important that the clients and the customers, the families and your stakeholders, whether the organisation is currently affected or not, are given information on what your organisation is saying about the issue. So again, I'd probably suggest not only having potential to have a lawyer up your sleeve, think about whether or not you might need, support more broadly if the staff are affected at some point. So that's the end of my slide presentation. Henry, if you've got questions there, and I'm assuming you may have a few, I'm really happy to answer them.
Yeah, thank you, Jo. That was really enlightening. I've got one question, and then I've probably got a question myself if there's time. We've got one from Simon asking kind of a couple of things. Just interested in your view on some recent events such as Dreamworld and the stabbing death of a support worker in WA. And I think Dreamworld's referring to there was an accident at Dreamworld a couple of years ago, and then and also what to do when your organisational position is undermined by a parent company or by the funder. So there's a lot there. Is there any of that that you'd like to speak to?
Sure. Well, let's just take one at a time. Dreamworld, and again, it's a company, and I didn't manage that crisis. I have managed corporate crises previously for other companies in another consultancy I used to work in. It struck me at the time that the board chair, who was a well-known person at the time, a former editor of the Women's Weekly, was ill-prepared when she fronted the media. I think played right, or handled right. Played is the wrong word, but handled right. It probably could have been done far more effectively than how they handle it. Now, I can't recall the precise details about what she said or didn't say, but my memory, and I'm sure the memory of many of you listening, is that whatever it was she said, it just wasn't the right tone, and she didn't say the right thing, and they didn't do the right thing. I just don't recall the exact detail, but I think that's a real indication of being prepared before you go out. And again, it's not about lawyers. They would have had lawyers, all over what they said. What they needed was to be better prepared before she went out. And it strikes me that she probably wasn't. And again, probably getting advice, making those decisions collectively, getting, your media people, getting lawyers and the senior staff involved before you say anything, before your spokesperson comes out, I think is really important. The other one was the stabbing death of the worker in Western Australia.
Yeah.
Was that right?
Yeah,
Can you just refresh my memory what happened? I have a recollection of that. Can you?
To be honest, I'm not necessarily familiar with it, but I think it's with reference to perhaps or maybe it's easier to respond to a scenario, and I know that there are the ones out there where a support worker is injured or could in fact be killed by a client. And I know that for providers is a particularly difficult, obviously in a number of ways, particularly difficult situation to deal with, but also in terms of media, how to deal with a situation like that.
Yeah, and here we're getting to, I suppose, things that are part of what happens in the work that you all do. Some of these things may or may not be subject to inquiry at the Royal Commission. And I suppose it's not up to me to make a determination about who is going to call in what evidence. But if you have had a situation like that happen, or if you're aware of that situation having happened in the past, again, or if it happens in real time in the next period when the Royal Commission is operational, then I think it is again being prepared. you know, it's about being ready to say, we have all we have taken all precautions that we possibly could have, or, you know, being ready to be able to say what you did or didn't do. If it was a clear, you know, issue that happened and it shouldn't have, then clearly that's something that you need to get serious legal advice on, because there are some serious ramifications for the organisation, you know, personal, you know, actions from the staff member involved or their family. So that's something that I can't, you know, you can't predict that. But I think it's about, again, right now, you know, you've all got processes in place to try and make sure that that doesn't happen. Don't want that to happen. But things happen, mistakes happen, incidents happen, and we need to, but we can't sit there and go, you know, what happens if, you know, someone gets a cut on their left forearm? What happens if they get a cut on their left elbow? You know, there are so many different, thousands of possibilities with crises and problems with service providers that you would go really quite, you get quite, you know, stressed dealing with it and thinking about it. It's about having the processes in place to deal with it should it happen.
Okay, thank you for that. We might we do have a couple more questions, so we've only got a couple of minutes left. So I might give one of these ones a bit of a go. We've got from Catherine. She asks, in relation to the bank of good news stories which you were talking about, when should these be released? During the time of the crisis, or now ahead of any crisis, to build a positive public perception and brand image?
Good question, and obviously it would probably be the latter, I think. If you have a bank of good news stories, and you are, I've advised clients who were approached about a particular incident, you know, by Four Corners, and they did a lengthy interview, and we worked through what they would say in that interview about a particular incident. They were one of a number of providers that were interviewed in terms of service providers. You know, if that organisation had released a whole raft of one or two positive stories or gone out looking for positive publicity, right then, well, a couple of things would have happened. It probably would have been a distraction for the staff right then. Probably was a bit of a waste of time for them. It's probably better for the story to blow over. Usually media storms don't take long to blow over, usually a day or two, unless it is a really big story. So waiting a day or two and then thinking, okay, I'm not going to go to Four Corners with that story because they've just tried to, you know, dissect this story, but I'll go to somewhere else. I'll go to another publication. I'll take this positive story somewhere else, or an op-ed, for example, or, you know, a picture story about an initiative that you're undertaking. So before and after, I think, is the best way to play it. In the middle of it, that storm needs to be managed the best you can. And again, that storm won't take that long to blow over, hopefully. But I think when it is blowing, you need to be focused on it.
Okay, thank you. And then we've got one more question that's probably going to be our last one, because we do need to finish by 3 o'clock. Donna asks, how should you respond to media questions about other service providers who've been identified during the Royal Commission processes? For example, if you're asked, what do you think about the allegations at another service, or do you think it happens often in the sector with other providers, etc.?
Yeah, and again, a great question, because it's a way, you know, if I was being, you know, an unethical journalist, it's a way of getting a story. If you go to organisation X, which is in the middle of the storm because the story has broken about a series of incidents that's happened in their organisation over a period of 10 years or whatever it is, then clearly they're going to be battening down the hatches, probably not talking to people. So a journalist, if they're trying to fill up what they're doing, whatever that is, whether it's a print story or a radio story or just background, are going to look for other comments. You're absolutely spot on there. They're going to keep looking. I'll call up another organisation and say, might be someone you know, it might be a friend of yours. You know, many of you listening may have journalists as friends. You know, I'm married to one, I was one, you know, these journalists are human beings too. But, you know, we need to go, okay, what is the agenda here? What are they trying to get out of me? Why are they asking this question? My advice would be to not respond. It's not up to you to talk about another organisation's issues. You know, if you're going to speak about the Royal Commission, I think you need to have prepared lines about the positives that are going to come out of the Royal Commission, the importance of holding it, the importance of what might be examined in it. You need to have some things that you can say. Saying nothing, saying talk to the hand, saying no comment, pushing the microphone away figuratively doesn't achieve much when you talk to media, because all they do is go, she's hiding something. He's got something that he's hiding. You know, I'm going to remember that for later. So you've got to have something to say. You've got to have something that you can talk about, but you don't have to talk about another organisation, because it's not your role to do that. There's probably legal implications for doing that if you're specifically commenting about another organisation. If you're speaking more widely about the incidence of X or Y problem, you know, abuse or, you know, neglect or, you know, physical abuse, sexual abuse, whatever it might be, you know, there is no positives in talking about it to journalists unless it's extraordinarily well controlled, and you know, it would be a very rare occasion where you would do so. So I think I would probably defer that question and politely steer it away and talk about the positives about the Royal Commission, and obviously agree some lines about that.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, I think that's probably all we have time for, just given it's just coming up to 3 o'clock.
So there's one last slide here that I've just got, and I'll just let you sort of to recap really. Sorry, what am I doing here? Hang on. Sorry, everyone. There's one last thing that I want to everyone just to recap really. What have we learned today? And I'm sure you've all been thinking about this for a while. This isn't, most of what I've said isn't probably going to come as a lot of news to you or startling, and you're not going to be, you know, you're not going to be sort of thinking, oh my goodness, I've never heard that before. But what have we learned? Well, what we've learned is we need to prepare now. We need to act now to ensure your organisation's ready. In the event that something happens, an issue or crisis emerges that might damage your reputation or the reputation of your organisation, getting prepared. It may never happen. Don't be fearful. Don't allow it to make your organisation stop working and not function, but be prepared. The second thing is keeping informed, scanning the issues so you can really manage them well before they turn into something bigger. And the third thing is communicate efficiently, promptly, and simply to people, to everyone. You know, during the Royal Commission, this is the last thing that I want to leave you with, you know, issues and media reports may arise, and they will arise, that are out of your control. But the better prepared you are now, the better position you'll be to manage those risks and outcomes. So I wish you all the best of luck in the coming months, and I'm sure with some forethought and planning, and the fact that you're even sitting through this webinar to think about these things today is an important part of your planning process.
Thank you very much, Jo. That was really enlightening and really helpful. So I'd like to thank you on behalf of NDS and all of the attendees for your time today. I will remind everyone that there is a handout available with some summary of the slides. If you head to the handout part of the GoToWebinar, you can download it there. At the 50 Acres is one of the expert panelists on NDS's expert panel that we have sitting on the Royal Commission Hub. So if you are wanting to engage with 50 Acres, and then we also have other experts, including some legal experts. I know that would form part of Joe's presentation as well. So, so thanks again, Joe, and thank you all for watching.
My pleasure. Thank you. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.